Allie with Potomac Beads. Join me in making these nice brick stitch sugar skull earrings. You may have seen them last year on one of our lives. We're bringing them back this year as a kit. If you want to grab your kit or gather your supplies, check out the links below to shop with us online. Let's get ready to make these fun sugar skull earrings. To begin our sugar skull earrings, we are going to begin at the front of the earrings. So you can see, you can make them the same, or you can have fun like we're doing here and making a male and a female sugar skull. So I'm going to start with one of the sugar skulls. They look the same until they take on their feminine or their masculine qualities with the bow tie as well as the flowers. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin on the outside of the earring here towards the back. And what I'm going to do, you can begin in the back, you can begin in the front, doesn't really matter. I'll begin right here towards the front. I'm going to go through the second hole of the piece right there. The first thing I'm going to do is tie on my thread here, and I'm using 0.006 wildfire beading thread in the white color. We're going to be doing a series of brick stitches with 15 OC beads. If you don't have 15 O's, you can obviously do this with 11s. You can do it with different sizes if you don't want to do that tiny 15 O. When you're doing the brick stitch around the piece to begin with, what I want you to do after tying a double knot there to the end is pick up 2 of your 15 OC beads. You're going to let those lay down next to the side of the skull. Go through the next hole in the skull. So you're treating this as a filigree piece where you're going through, sewing from the front to the back, and then you're going to go up through bead number 2. This is the start for any brick stitch project. So if you happen to get the bead box last month, we did brick stitch as well. And we're going to make it so that these 15 O's lay right next to one another and decorate the exterior. Picking up a 15, sewing into that same hole. And you can see I kind of press the beads towards the back so they don't fall down into the design, pushing them up towards the front, and then sewing back through so my beads sit that the holes are facing vertical. You're going to have your thread lines running along the outer edge here as you go in and create this nice rounded look of just having the exterior framed out in gold. I'm going to continue around the whole way. Some areas you're going to have 2 pieces of thread going through the filigree piece, and sometimes you might just have 1 as you go into just a tiny little area. As you go around here adding them in, you can see that I've done it the whole way along. I'm going to go the whole way along the front of the head, past the nose, down, and I'll connect with you in the corner when I show you how I'm going to add my corner bead. So once you're coming down, whether or not you're coming down, who I'm calling Candy or Carl here, you're coming down to the point of the base of the skull. And what I want you to do is instead of adding 1 bead for your brick stitch, I want you to add 2 beads. You're going to skip over then into basically the jaw of them, go through, and what that's going to do is create kind of a point with that middle bead, and then you're only going to sew back through bead number 2. So almost like you did at the start, where you start the brick stitch with 2 beads, you're going to do that to create a nice kind of pointed edge so you don't lose any of that design element. From here, you continue on as normal then, going in if you need to, double up sometimes when you go in and add your thread through. And the nice thing is if you're using a gray or a silver thread, you really don't see it much at all. So you're going through again, continuing on with the brick stitch, adding a bead, sewing through the next opening space on your filigree piece. Once you're through that, you're sewing back up through that same bead so your thread comes out at the top of the bead. When you pull nice and tight, you can see that little loop that's created. That thread shrinks and the bead sits up. I'm going to go the whole way around here, back till I get to this side here. Again, I'm going to do 2 beads that you have the bead that connects and then the other bead that's going to arch over, just like the point here. And then as we get in towards the interior, you're just going to pay attention to how many beads you have on the inside. When it comes to brick stitch, you would rather the beads set right next to one another rather than having them really, really tight and overlapping. You'll get a much better finish if you make sure that rather than overlapping, if there's even just a little tiny space in between. I'm going to continue the whole way around the exterior of my sugar skull here till I get to the top and the back base of the cranium. When it comes to making Carl, or the male version here, what you can do is actually finish off once you get to the top of the thread right there and knot off your thread around the design. You can also, if you want to, fill in the top of Carl's head like I'm going to do Candy's right now. What I'm going to do is I'm coming through my last bead of my brick stitch. I'm going to sew through my loop, go in towards the interior design, sewing underneath through the next piece of my filigree, and that gets me right in to the interior that I'm now ready. I don't see any thread, and I'm ready to decorate the inside of the skull as well. So again, put on one bead, just like I've been doing. So underneath that piece that your thread is coming out of, and then back up through that bead. So you're basically continuing with that same stitch of the brick stitch just towards the interior of the project now. Add a bead, sew through, and you're going to line these up right along the interior of the thread the whole way back to the start of the project. So I'm going to just line the inside of Candy's sugar skull head. When you're getting ready to add to the middle of Candy's little flowers here in her hair, what you're going to do is pick up one of your 15 OC beads, like you're getting ready to continue with your brick stitch. You're going to pick up one of your flower cups here. Add a little green to the center of your flower, and that's in the form of an 11 OC bead. So back through your purple flower cup, back through the 15O that your thread was coming out of, and push that flower towards the front of the design. From here, I'm going to sew through the piece, through that filigree area, from the back towards the front. And I'm going to sew back through that 15 that my thread was coming out of. So just like I'm going in and creating that brick stitch, I'm going back through so that that same 15O that my thread sits upon for my flower is facing up. So you can see it right there. From here, I want you to add another 15, add onto that 15, go through your piece, back up through that 15 that we just added. I'm going to kind of turn it to the side. And if you'll notice, I also took off the top of my earring just because it's easier to work with if the ear wire is not actually there. Once I'm coming out of that 15 there, I'm going to add my next 15O flower. So I'm going to add a 15, another one of my flower cups, another one of my 11O seed beads. Let that fall down on the design. Go back through the flower cup, back through the 15. And this one is going to stick up a little bit higher. Add another 15. And go in to do your brick stitch. I'm going through the skull, pushing that 15 right up along the piece, and then I'm going to sew back through that 15 towards the top. So you're doing the exact same thing on the brick stitch here, but you're just doing it so that way when you're looking at the piece, you have that 15O that you just added sitting straight up. And the flowers are just coming off the top of the brick stitch. So you can see that next bead right there is right there in the brick stitch. Coming out there, add one more 15, one more flower, one more 11. So back through the flower, back through that 15 that your thread was coming out of. Give a nice tight pull, pushing them all towards the front of the piece so she's got those nice flowers in her hair. Make sure you don't have a lot of extra thread showing. Add one more 15 onto your thread and needle, and then you're going back around to finish up with your brick stitch. You're most likely going to have about 4 or so beads prior to the onset of your flowers, and then 4 or 5 beads after the flowers as well. So going through here, I'm going back through, adding my next bead in my next brick stitch. When I pull that nice and tight, it goes right there into the design. I've got 3 more beads to add in the 15-0, and then I'll show you how we're going to add her nice purple eye to the middle of her design. Once you finish adding in that brick stitch along the middle of the cranium there, you're going to take those 2 thread ends, once you get to the end here, and you're going to simply tie those 2 thread ends to the back of the design. Now I'm going to add her eye with a completely new thread. If you want to, you can sew down the thread along the design here back to get to this base, so that way you're ready to add in her actual eye. I'm going to simply take these thread ends here once I have the end, and this is the same goes if you want to just tie off the thread when we get to Carl, and you just burn down those thread edges. And those are towards the back of the project. When it comes to Carl, you can actually just go in and burn off those thread edges right after the fact if you don't want to fill his head in with the gold beads. Now what about the eye, you say? For the eye, I'm just going to start off with a separate piece of thread. And you can see how I've done here. I've just tied it, the knot's right there in the back so you don't see it around the filigree. I'm just going to put the bead right into the center of the eye. Go in underneath. There's 1, 2, and about 3 or 4 little areas there. I'm going to sew through one of them. I still have my long piece of thread. Pick up my purple bead here. Put that and position it exactly where I want to in her eye. Towards the base there is where I like it. Go through that filigree around the base. Sew back through the eye. And I'm going to do this one more time to get it nice and in place. Go back through the filigree at the base of the eye there. And you can see I'm just sewing back and forth. I'm flipping it over so I can see a little bit easier to go back through the piece, back through the eye. Once I'm through the eye, I'll go through the filigree one more time. Once I'm through that filigree one more time, I'm going to go back through the crystal. And now my thread end and the thread that I'm working with are on the exact same side. I'm going to bring my thread end to the back of the filigree piece and then simply tie the knots together. I'm just going to take these 2 thread ends now, tie it together, and Sugar Skull Candy is completed. I'm going to do the outside in the brick stitch of Carl, and then I'll show you how we're going to add his bow tie to his design. His eye will be added in the exact same fashion as I just did here with the purple one, except he has a black or a orange eye to go along with that nice kind of Halloween Dia de los Muertos theme. So I've gone ahead and completed the outside of Carl and given him his gold exterior, along with sewing in one of those 4mm round orange crystals. Now what I'm going to do is make a bow tie to classy him up a little bit. So to get him ready for our party, we are going to be adding on one of our 3mm beads. And then I have some black 11-0 seed beads here. I'm going to add 3, 4, 5, and 6. So back through that same round bead. What that's going to do is make a little start of the bow tie. Same here on the other side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Once you have those 6 beads on, so back through that same round bead, as well as the first bead in that set of 6 that you put on in the other side. Give a nice tight pull here. I'm going to add 6 more beads on now to his bow tie. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Once I'm done with that 6th bead here, I'm going back through that same 11-0 seed bead that my thread is coming out of, as well as the round bead in the middle, as well as the first 11-0 on the other side. What that's going to do is, as I round this out, bring that little bow effect to the bottom there. 6 more beads go on this side. And I'm going to go back up through that bead that my thread is currently coming out of. Because I'm already at the side where my bead has that tail there, Just gonna kind of hang out here, and there's your bow tie to go on to Carl. So to get the bow tie to go on to Carl here, what we're gonna do now is sew through the crystal, and I'm going to attach the crystal onto the base of his little brain here, just like I did basically the eye. So what I'm gonna do is take this bow tie, I'm gonna position it right into the corner here. I'm currently coming out of the 3mm bead. I'm gonna go through the side of Carl here, go back through, so I'm basically doing the same thing as brick stitch, sewing through the form, coming out of the crystal. Now I'm gonna sew back through the crystal, pull that in towards the interior. On the opposite side here, I'm gonna go through the form again. And as I go through the form here, what I'm gonna do is bring that starter tail thread towards the back, bring them both to the back of the design, make sure my bow tie looks nice and even, and tie these off around the back. That'll get your bow tie on your design. The knot will be hidden along the back. And then all I have to do is reattach Carl and Candy's ear wires, making sure that they're facing opposite directions, so when I put them in the ears, one is facing one way, one is facing the other way. Burn down any thread ends that you may have, and then after burning down those thread ends, attach my ear wires so I have my matching set here. He's got his nice bow tie on, he's ready to go, and he and his date are ready for their fun evening, for their nice Dia de los Muertos. Thanks so much for joining me on your brick stitch adventure making Candy and Carl in our sugar skull earrings. Remember, this is a great way to practice your brick stitch techniques as well as embellishing a form that you may not have thought to do so before. Remember, if you do want to get the kit, you can shop with us online at PotomacBeads.com. You can also check out the links below. In the comments, please, please, please mention what you're changing, any ideas that you may have, some fun tidbits and things to help out to make everyone a better beater. As always, you can also remember to give a little thumbs up if you like the video, as well as subscribe to get regular updates from us here at Potomac Beads. Thanks so much for watching, and enjoy your new sugar skull earrings.